Welcome back to The World This Week. In February, prisoners in Guantanamo embarked on a hunger strike to protest their continued detention and what they regard as inhumane treatment. More than 2 months later, they still haven't broken their fast. Guantanamo authorities have intensified their crackdown on the strike in recent days. As inmates were moved from communal facilities to single cells over the weekend, clashes broke out between guards and prisoners, causing injuries. The strike triggered an emergency motion in the European Parliament today, calling for Guantanamo's closure. Although President Obama signed an executive order 4 years ago to close down the military prison, congressional acts have prevented the detainees from leaving. Charlotte Hawkins has more on the current protest.
Hey, hey, ho, ho, Guantanamo has got to go.
There are 166 detainees left in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. 52 of them have been classified as hunger strikers, while lawyers say they are joined by many more. Some haven't eaten in 72 days. Prisoners say they began the strike after guards mishandled their Korans, looking for hidden weapons. Authorities deny this.
I think what the hunger strike really reflects is the absolute despair of the people who are down there. The hopelessness of the situation, the fact that the United States and everybody else has forgotten them.
Hunger strikes frequently take place at Guantanamo, but this protest is one of the longest and widest reaching. 15 of the striking detainees are now being force-fed, and 3 have been hospitalized. In an article in the New York Times, Yemeni detainee Samir Naji al-Hassan Mokbel described his treatment.
They tied my hands and feet to the bed. They forcibly inserted an IV into my hand. I spent 26 hours in this state, tied to the bed. I will never forget the first time they passed the feeding tube up my nose. I can't describe how painful it is to be force-fed this way. As it was thrust in, it made me feel like throwing up. I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't. There was agony in my chest, throat, and stomach. I had never experienced such pain before.
Another striking prisoner is British citizen Shaka Amma. He has been held at the camp for 11 years without charge. Although he's been cleared for release, he still remains behind bars. The same is true for 85 other detainees. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights condemned the US government for failing to comply with international law.
Basically, this has gone on now for 11 years. People are arbitrarily detained. Many people in there there's no end to their situation. They haven't been charged with any crime. Many of them have even been cleared for release, but haven't been released. So effectively, this is a breach of international law, where it's clearly prohibited that people should be arbitrarily detained.
Striking prisoners are now also complaining that guards are failing to provide them with drinkable water. As we consider Margaret Thatcher's legacy here in the UK, tarnished by the death of 10 IRA hunger strikers on her watch, can Obama afford to ignore the Guantanamo hunger strikers and his election promises of 5 years ago to close down the notorious camp? Charlotte Hawkins, Islam Channel.
Well, a similar hunger strike took place in 2005, involving as many as 200 detainees. So will another strike achieve anything this time around? With me in the studio to discuss this is Feroz Abbasi, a former Guantanamo detainee who was the first British citizen to be sent there. We also have Makbool Javaid, a human rights lawyer here in Britain. And joining us by phone from the United States is another lawyer, Captain Michael Schwarz, who represents several prisoners at Guantanamo. And finally, we're pleased to be joined on the phone as well by Montgomery Granger, a former guard at the camp and author of the book Saving Grace at Guantanamo Bay. Welcome to you all. Let me start with you, Feroz Abbasi. You were a Guantanamo detainee, I think, until 2005, and I believe you took part yourself in a hunger strike. Do these strikes ever achieve concessions from the authorities?
The first hunger striking Camp X-Ray. The first hunger strike in Camp X-Ray, it did achieve something. That was the first hunger strike that the detainees took part in, and it's because of Shaka Amma, the last British resident in Guantanamo Bay. he was the one who actually instructed them, Arabs being from a very conservative kind of community and society, that this is what they need to do from the experience of the IRA. They did it in Camp X-Ray because of desecration of the Quran, and it did achieve something because the general then actually went up to Sheikh Karama, took his hat off and spoke to him on a level, and there was some kind of progress in that regard. Subsequently, I don't think it actually, I think the administration learned from their first, from the first hunger strike, and they've been implementing that kind of knowledge in order that no changes can be made by second or subsequent hunger strikes.
But there is this hunger strike going on now. I mean, do you think conditions have actually got worse? I mean, why is there a strike?
Okay, conditions have got worse. Camp X-Ray, each camp that I was subsequently sent to was worse. It became more confined, more solitary, more psychologically damaging. So conditions have got worse, and the hunger strike right now is very different from the hunger strikes that I observed and took part in before. This has gone on for longer, and there's a lot more people who are sustaining, the hunger strike through. So basically, this is more serious than the other ones, I believe.
Let me come to you, if I may, Captain Schwarz in the United States, who represents Guantanamo detainees. We heard in the clip at the beginning that Obama, reminding us that Obama ordered the closure of Guantanamo Bay in his first day in office in 2009, and nothing's happened since. I mean, is it really the fault of Congress that's blocking it, or could the president not do much more?
Well, Jonathan, thank you for having me on. You know, I think it depends on which branch of government you ask. They're going to be pointing the fingers at each other, but the bottom line is the United States government is at fault for the fact that Guantanamo Bay remains open today. The president claimed that he would be closing down the facility. Congress clearly blocked that, but a lot of people here right now are finding it hard to believe that the Obama administration can't do more to serve that promise back in 2009 of closing down Guantanamo.
Well, what could he do? Just give us the steps he could take.
Well, he is limited right now by Congress in terms of the funding to remove prisoners from Guantanamo Bay. He's also limited in his diplomatic relationships, I think, with foreign countries in terms of repatriating or finding new homes for detainees currently there. But really, it's going to take some political will, some political clout that he would have to be willing to give up to try to make that happen. And so far, we're just not seeing that.
Montgomery Granger, let me come to you. I mean, you served as a guard at Guantanamo Bay, and you think these men are, it's right that they should be held there. Is that your view?
Somewhat. First of all, I'd like to thank you for having me on, Michael. And I'm not a guard. I am a retired major, a medical service officer, and when I was at Gitmo from February to June 2002, I was the ranking U.S. Army Medical Department officer with the Joint Detainee Operations Group under Joint Task Force 160. And any views that I express with you today are my own and don't represent the United States government or the U.S. Army. You know, the Geneva Conventions and the law of land warfare were written to protect innocent civilians during wartime, not to protect those who would pretend to be civilians in order to murder them. And when we got there, we were told these were the worst of the worst, that there was a prison upheaval in Afghanistan, and that those who were brought to Guantanamo Bay first were some of those. You know, during World War II, the United States held over 400,000 lawful combatant prisoners of war without one call for extra legal privileges for them. And it baffles me what's different now. And I think that the Military Commissions Act of 2009, which grants detainees the same legal rights and privileges as U.S. citizens would find in federal court, is more than generous. We've had several incidents, you know, some during World War II, where German saboteurs were caught dry foot on U.S. soil, were tried, most were executed.
Well, let me come back to your point about prisoners of war and so on. I mean, the United States military itself has started a trial process, albeit in military trials, to deal with these people. So they accept that these are people who ought to be put on trial. Now, how can you hold people justifiably for 11 years without putting them even on trial or charging them?
Because the Geneva Conventions and the law of land warfare stipulate that even lawful combatant prisoners of war may be held until the end of hostilities. And I know that sounds like it's unlimited. Maybe that's the way it will end up. But that's the legal way to look at it. We're a nation of laws, not men. And however emotional the situation is made to appear by the mainstream media, I assure you it's never as bad as it's made out to be. And the laws governing the care and treatment of the detainees are being followed to the strictest standards of excellence. In fact, an ICRC, that's an International Committee of the Red Cross Physician, whom I worked with at Gitmo back in 2002, told me no one does detention operations better than the United States.
Well, let me come on to our speaker in London, Makbool Javaid, who's a human rights lawyer. Do you accept that the conditions are very good and that they're entitled to be held there, these people?
No, I mean, I think that that's a view that doesn't accord with international human rights standards. I think that the position is quite clear that as far as the detention of individuals is concerned, it's can't be justified as a matter of international law. You know, even in a war situation, the Geneva Convention is there to ensure that there is fairness, that people are entitled to a fair process and right to trial. That is not happening. We have a situation here where there were 850 people, 700 have been released. So the worst of the worst doesn't sort of, it doesn't comply with that situation. 86 now, out of the 166 who were there, have been cleared for release. So the Military Commission itself has investigated and said 86 people can be released, but they are still there. Now, you know, even on Montgomery's argument, it doesn't make any sense. There is no justification as a matter of law to retain those people. And the process that has been used is clearly not fair. And that criticism emanates not only from the US, it emanates from the UK and Europe and other democratic systems, where we have to have a process where if individuals are accused of having committed offences of whatever nature, they need to be put through a process. They need to be treated in a way which is in accordance with international human rights standards, and that isn't happening. Force-feeding people, keeping them in cages, engaging in forcible cell extraction, the kinds of treatment of tying to beds, this cannot be justified, and the United States cannot justify this. President Obama could not justify it. That's why he wanted to close Guantanamo, because it is a black spot in American jurisprudence and history. Let me come to Feroz Abbasi. You know Shaka Amar. He's also a British citizen. I mean, you were lucky, it seems, to be let out in 2005. Why is he being held for another 8 years without any charge or anything?
What I believe has happened with Shaka Amar is a British resident, and then the US government wants to send him to Saudi Arabia rather than here. The reason why I think is because he was instrumental in standing up for the rights of the detainees, and so they're punishing him basically. They've isolated him, and then they're trying to keep him there because I think that if he does come out, being an Arab speaker and spanning the West as well, he's more able to actually speak on what has gone on there than any of us could do.
So they're trying to silence him?
They're trying to silence him, yeah. And I want to challenge the issue about prisoner of war. Most of the detainees there, if not all, weren't caught engaging in hostilities against the United States of America. They were sold. I was sold for $30,000 US. So the US does not know where these detainees came from. They do not know who picked them up. All they know is that some Afghan or some Pakistani came and then handed them over and said they were doing such and such, and they were caught in such and such a place. The US government cannot confirm that. That's the reason why when I ended up in Guantanamo Bay, I thought to myself that, the US government is going to have to frame me, going to have to make up something in order to justify me being here. Well,
Captain Schwarz, let me come back to you. I mean, you're acting for these Guantanamo detainees. I mean, what can you actually do when all the legality is on your side, and yet the executive, whether it's Congress or the president, just refuses to acknowledge that?
I can't tell you how difficult it is as a defense attorney to represent these men in Guantanamo Bay. The government has an all-out assault on the relationship that the detainees who have attorneys have with their lawyers. It's very difficult to operate. Right now, in fact, I had to return to my office just to take this phone call because we can't work on our government computers because of what we've recently learned is United States government monitoring of our privileged information. This is just on the heels of last month's discovery that there are, in fact, or were, in fact, microphones hidden in meeting rooms where detainees and their attorneys meet. And for years, I had been meeting with my client, having conversations that were privileged and related to the strategy of our case, and the government had the capacity to listen. And what's worse than that, at one point, they were hidden in these ceiling-mounted smoke detectors. And we asked the guard one day to come in to the room, and I pointed at the ceiling, and I said, can you tell me what that is? Is it a listening device? And the guard responded absolutely with no uncertainty, that's a smoke detector. Well, through the course of events in our investigation, turns out it wasn't a smoke detector. It was a microphone.
Well, Montgomery Granger, let me come to you on that point. That example we just heard shows that you're being lied to by the authorities. I mean, are you not worried that perhaps you're being lied to when you're told that these people who were picked up in Afghanistan were actually enemy combatants, when we've just heard from Feroz Abbasi that most of them were sold and had nothing to do with any kind of carrying of guns or anything of the kind?
Right, yes, of course it comes to mind as a question. I describe in my book, Saving Grace at Guantanamo Bay, that the conflict between the hatred I felt for the detainees and also the empathy was like an emotional train wreck. And I witnessed that every day in the detention hospital, where the U.S. Navy medical personnel were taught to heal the whole person, so wanted to engage in small talk and relax the detainee while they were performing, rehab or whatever. And then you had the Army military police who were told not to speak to the detainees. And there was great conflict. And, of course, on a human level, it is tragic. But as a former military officer, you don't get to pick your mission. You pick your job. And I just want to say that, the documented recidivism rate amongst released detainees from Gitmo is 27%. And I might disagree also with the term sold. It is a bounty. Whether we like it or not, at wartime those things happen. And force-feeding unlawful combatant detainees at Gitmo is not only humane, it is also legal and ethically appropriate, given that the alternative is permanent damage to their internal organs and then death. Not to force-feed the detainees who are doing the hunger strike could be tantamount to murder or manslaughter or at least euthanasia, and none of those are approved protocol for the military medical personnel in charge of caring for the detainees with dignity and respect. And I want to remind you that also these detainees are choosing not to eat. They're offered a variety of fresh foods every day, which are consistent with their dietary and religious preferences. When I served at Gitmo in 2002, they were fed lamb and baklava for particular religious holiday meals. And what they're doing now is they're perpetrating a well-known detention operation disruption technique in order to garner even more sympathy to their cause. And, I think that's what gets lost in the mainstream media accounts of what's going on. Yes, on a human level, suffering is bad. None of us like that. It's horrible. But on the other hand, they do have a choice.
But they don't, because you've said yourself that maybe they'll be in there forever. You've said this war could go on forever. So, I mean, what prospect do they have of release or of human dignity and freedom?
Right. It is a dilemma, and it's a human dilemma. And I don't have all the information I might need to be able to speak in more depth about the legal issues. All I know is what I was trained to do, and understanding the, obligations on the medical side to provide for at least as good care as the Americans got at Gitmo. And I'm all through my book, I say how much better the treatment was. Yes, they're incarcerated. I had no control over that. But their treatment is world-class. And all the ICRC Swiss physicians I worked with, both at Gitmo and later in my career in Iraq, were constantly telling us that there's nobody even close to how well we do detention operations in the United States.
Well, okay, thank you. Let me just come back to Makbool Javaid, and I'd like to ask about the British role, because Shaka Amar, as we heard, is a British resident. I mean, has the British government really been doing anything like enough to get at least the British people who are either citizens or residents released?
Well, I think with Shaka's case, the view is that the British government hasn't been doing as much as it could do. He's a British resident. He has a wife and 4 children in this country. He's been there for 11 years. And we are told that representations have been made and that they have asked for his release, but he's still being detained there. Now, the special relationship must involve, must it not, the ability to be able to persuade one's partner to accede to particular requests. And we are told by the Foreign Office that requests have been made, but it hasn't happened. So,
but this has not only with Congress. I mean, if Congress is saying we haven't got the money to release these people, the British government could pay, or private people could pay for his airfare across the Atlantic from Cuba. I mean, what reason can there be for Britain not being tougher?
It's inexplicable. I mean, one can only suspect that the British government is complicit in Shaka's continued detention. That's the only inference that one can draw from the fact that, if the block is financial, then that financial sort of gap can be easily met. The fact of the matter is that there is a connection with this country. He's not a citizen, but he's a British resident. He has a wife and 4 children. And one would think that at least morally, the British government would do far more than has been done. And, we have, as I said before, 86 people who have already been cleared, including Shaka in 2007. There is no, you don't need to sort of go beyond the fact that the our military itself has said he's completely innocent, there's nothing proven against him, he can be released. So why are you still holding this individual despite your own investigation?
Let me come back to you, Captain Schwarz. Is there any political pressure? I mean, you're a lawyer, you're doing what you can through legal channels. Is there any political pressure on Obama now to release these people, or is it just a forgotten issue with the media hardly covering it and no politicians, either Democrat or Republican, taking it up and trying to make an issue out of this long detention of these people?
I think it's absolutely a political issue for the men who are facing military commission, of which I believe there are 6 now. And for the remaining 160, it's purely political. And it's surprising to see that it's taken the fact that, what do we have? I think 52, I heard, was the number of hunger-striking detainees now, to raise enough awareness and enough attention that this is still an ongoing and important matter. I don't consider this a dilemma. Mr. Granger called it a dilemma. When you have men who are cleared for release, who are suffering under conditions that are so bad that they're willing to starve themselves to death, I don't think that's a dilemma. I think you have to find a way, whether it's, whatever political process is required, to find a way to let these men home. I think for the men, get home. For the men who are facing trial, I think you have to find a way to provide them the rights that the law requires. And that's right now what we're litigating in the 9/11 trial.
Well, on that note, we'll have to bring the program to an end. Thank you very much for taking part on this program about Guantanamo Bay, particularly Feroz Abbasi for coming here as a former detainee. Thank you very much, and thank you for watching.